Hey everyone, this is Mike, and as I mentioned in a previous video, I was going to do another video on Black Mage, and today is that day. Yesterday I finally cleared Savage for 4 weeks in a row now on Black Mage, so I got a little bit of more experience, been able to experiment with some things here or there, change the way that I approach certain mechanics as well in order to minimize my movement and that kind of stuff. And it's actually been a lot of fun, and I'm definitely looking forward to doing optimization on Black Mage in the future as well. Currently my static is not doing any Savage optimization because we are still spending our time raiding, more specifically on Alexander Ultimate, because my static wants to finish off getting all of the weapons from that. So once we're done with that, we do plan to go back into Savage to try and optimize some stuff over there. Now, but until then, basically not much in terms of optimization, so all of the optimization that I do will come from myself. When it comes down to like rotational changes or that kind of stuff, or trying to maneuver around specific mechanics a little bit in a different way as well. But outside of that, nothing too crazy going on just yet, and also don't have a lot of time to do that. For example, yesterday, surprisingly enough, we ended up one-shotting all of the fights, meaning that I didn't really have that many pulls to experiment with different stuff. So I do kind of want to put that out of the way first, because I didn't really have that much time to optimize everything to the best of my ability, like I have been able to do on Red Mage, for example, when we first procced through the fight. Because of course, when you're proccing through a fight, you get a lot of time when it comes down to optimizing your rotation. Then of course, getting thrown into Summoner, didn't get a huge amount of time to optimize that either. A little bit more because of course the tier was still fresh, so we still wiped on the fights a whole lot more. But right now on Black Mage, not a huge amount of time that I had, but with the time that I did have on Black Mage, it did come very clear to me what the difference is between Black Mage and the other casters, kind of, and I wanted to talk about it a little bit. First I'll go into some of the fights and then talk about the things that, or specific mechanics that I maybe struggle with on Black Mage compared to on some of the other casters, and then towards the end I'll kind of give a comparison between how I would approach a fight different when it comes down to like looking at the difficulty of playing a job, because I think Black Mage is probably one of the easiest casters to play. Like specifically just like on a dummy, so to speak, like when it comes down to your rotation. But then when it comes down to actually playing it in a fight, I think Black Mage is going to be the hardest one for me until you figured stuff out. But I'll go into that in more detail in towards the end of the video. So first of all, specifically this Savage tier. What did I struggle with? Which fights feel really good, which fights have some parts where it doesn't feel that good to be playing Black Mage? Let's talk about that first. So E5 Savage, Ramuh, I think is a pretty good fight for Black Mage. The only thing that feels a little bit weird is the opener, right after you need to like run towards the safe spot. It's probably because of my spell speed is a little bit low, because normally if you want to play Black Mage optimally with like the best in slot gear, you have around 3.6k spell speed. I have 2.6k with food, so my spell speed is a lot lower than most other Black Mages out there, meaning that my opener is a little bit different for what it might optimally want to be, but for the most part it works pretty well with the way that it starts up on Ramuh now. Also, we ended up changing the positioning of certain mechanics a little bit as well, and some other stuff around that as well, so that it actually works really well. The main thing that for me going from a normal caster to from another caster to Black Mage is that I seem to be hugging the tanks a whole lot more in 5 and 6 specifically. Because a lot of our mechanics have the ranged go to the front of the boss when it comes down to like stacking or something like that. Because of course we want to give the melees the back of the boss so that they have their positionals and that kind of stuff. Now, because of that, because you just of course want to be limiting your movement and that kind of stuff, I do end up hugging the tanks a little bit more. So for example, on Ramuh, when we stack up together for the donuts from Step It Leader, instead of me standing in the group at the back of the boss, I just stand on the main tank, which it feels kind of weird to be just like in the face of the boss as a DPS player rather than as a tank, but it actually kind of ended up working out better that way. So those are a couple of different things that we've been doing. Also when it comes down to like ley lines optimization in that fight, for some reason they all just work out really well. Pretty much all of the mechanics fit really well with where you want to be using your ley lines, and you can plop them down on cooldown pretty much at all times without you really needing to step out all that much. So Ramuh and Black Mage, really comfortable fight. Going into E6, it's a little bit more movement heavy, but still not that much outside of one mechanic. I can really just stand still for the most part, and I've got instants ready for just about everything. The one mechanic where you have to be moving a little bit more is the fire tornadoes, where there's like cleaves going through the middles with the feathers that are like basically shooting from one side to the other, where you are chained together with other players. That's the only one where I'm moving a little bit too much. We could do that better, where instead of just going through the boss, we stay together on the same side of the feathers. Of course, because we just want to clear it and don't really care about optimization too much, we want to keep it consistent, rather than just play off what is most optimally. For example, when I was chained together with what was back then still my ninja, who is now playing samurai, he stayed on one side of the feathers, and I'm like, why would you stay there when we've always moved through? And he's like, well, you would have more uptime like that. And he's totally right. I should have just stayed there and I would be able to get an extra cast in, but just because we were so used to doing the mechanic differently, I just didn't think about that basically. So now going through those fights again, if I were to want to optimize them, my partner would always have to adjust to me and stay on my side of the feathers and that kind of stuff. So for now we're just doing it the normal way, the unoptimal maze, so to speak, but just for consistency's sake of killing the fight. The only real difficulty that I would have on Black Mage is, I think, the final phase, because there is quite a lot of moving to be done there. But since we pretty much always kill it before it comes to that now, I don't really care about that too much, because with all of the gear and stuff that we have and with the optimization that has been done already, we pretty much always kill it before it comes to the clusterfuck of mechanics. And because of that, pretty much E6 is also a very comfortable fight. Going into E7, I was actually thinking that fight was going to be so much worse when it came down to like having to move and all of that stuff, but first phase is really comfortable. Second phase, or like let's say the add phase, is pretty good as well. When it comes down to the third phase, that one is a little bit more sketchy here or there, because there's a little bit more moving parts involved, because we use our tank invulns on the tank busters and not on the tether mechanics, because you can use your tank invulns on the tether mechanics as well, and then you barely have to move as a party because we don't do that. There is still a lot of moving for us to be done there, but for the most part it actually is fine. The only real issue that I have with E7 at the moment is the final phase, the tornado, because you do have to move a lot there, and it's not just you needing to move a lot, it is you needing to move quite a distance in small partitions, so to speak. For Red Mage, that is ideal because they can stand still for one cast and then have their instant cast and move on. Summoner can kind of do that as well. But when it comes down to Black Mage, you're either having 3 instant casts in a row with triple cast, or you just stand still and then maybe have 1 instant cast here or there. So when it comes down to the tornado, still have some issues there. I think if I were to learn how to do the JP dodge, where you dodge through the AoEs that are chasing you, I think I would have a lot more uptime there, because I would basically be able to skip a like quarter rotation or something like that. So I do kind of want to learn that at some point. I'm not sure if it's possible with my ping, because of course most of the JP strats are possible because they have a very low ping to their servers and that kind of stuff. But who knows, maybe I'll try that out at some point. I did the Lucrezia strat for UCOB, the Exa Flare dodge as well, or well, I've done it once basically, just to have some fun with it, but it is something that maybe in the future I will try out when we do finally start optimizing that fight a bit more, because as I said, for now Alexander Ultimate is the focus, optimizing the fights comes later. When it comes down to Shiva, surprisingly enough, the fight is pretty good, especially the first phase. I've got optimized pretty well at this point. The only thing that I'm not quite sure of is my third leyline usage. So for those that don't know, in Shiva, all of your 90-second and 3-minute raid buffs, if you use them at 5 seconds before you pull the boss, you get a third usage of them before you go into the ad phase, and they'll still be up for the reopener when you get into the second phase of Shiva, or I guess third phase if you want to call it that. So because of that, I started doing ley lines 5 seconds pre-pull. Works out really well with the opener, because either, like, depending on what her follow-up mechanic is, either being Driving Frost or Biting Frost, I have stuff ready for the dodge, whatever it is, so it works out really well. And then my ley lines will also be up right after the Diamond Frost, whatever dodge I get. I did start doing something different last week with how I do my dodge if I get the slow, so that I go to the healer side as well rather than stay with the tank side, which is what I've always been doing so far. But I still have to change some stuff right there, and I'm gonna see what I can do to make that better. But phase 1 for now is pretty good. The third leyline usage is kind of scuffed, because it also kind of depends on what she's gonna do. Is it gonna be out or is it gonna be donut? and depending on what that is, I'm not quite sure where I should be placing my ley lines just yet, because there's so much randomness involved in that part of the mechanic. Like, where am I gonna end up because of light rampant? Like, am I gonna be north, south, east, west, whatever? Then after that, is it gonna be in or out? And then is it gonna be real or fake when it comes down to the stack markers as well? So there's a lot of moving parts there. Sometimes you get really lucky with you being able to stay in the ley lines pretty much 100% of the time, outside of like one dodge or something like that. But outside of that, if you get really unlucky, you barely get any uptime on the ley lines at all. Of course, they are a free usage of ley lines. If I were to hold them longer in the opener, I wouldn't even have them at all there. So anything I can gain in them is pretty much good. But so far, still a little bit iffy on where I should just specifically place them, basically, depending on the series of mechanics that we get. But I'll probably figure that out once we do indeed that optimization. When it comes down to the add phase, I have never had a more comfortable add phase than on Black Mage. Red Mage was okay, but the electric adds could get kind of scuffed for my healer, because Red Mage uses a lot of attacks, and in quick succession as well, and they don't do a crazy amount of damage because there are, of course, so many of them. And that meant that the electric adds, their counterattack move, could actually chunk you quite a bit, and it could surprise your healer a fair bit as well. Which, for example, on the other side of the arena, our machinist would actually die, I would say, about 60-70% of the time to the electric adds, just because he takes so much damage, because machinist has very high CPM, and that would just kind of make him take too much damage before our healer could react. And Red Mage was kind of the same like that. When it came down to Summoner, I still have no idea what I'm doing on the add phase. Am I just spamming Ruin 3? Do I dot adds? What do I do with my pet actions and that kind of stuff? All very scuffed on Summoner. But when it comes down to Black Mage, everything just fits so perfectly. You can do whatever you want in your fire phase. Then going into Ice, you don't need to get your Blizzard 4 up, you don't need to dot either, so you just use a Xenoglossy, and then you go back into your fire phase, because you don't really care too much about your mana, as there is pretty much a lot of downtime, and because Black Mage has such a high GCD damage output, so to speak. Like, for example, Summoner needs a lot of different stuff to work together to do their damage, like their dots, their ruins, their pet actions and that kind of stuff, and then the pet auto attacks. Whereas with Black Mage, all of your damage just comes from your GCDs pretty much, and Fire 4 is such a strong GCD, so that's where I can basically blow up most of the adds in like 2 hits, or maybe 1 hit if it direct hit crits or something like that. So I don't need to use that many casts as I would on the other 2 casters, and that way the add phase is incredibly comfortable, and just for that alone I really love playing Black Mage in that fight. When it comes down to the second phase, or third phase if you want to call it that, most of the stuff also works out quite fine. I did have to rethink the way that I did some of the mechanics, more specifically the first one, or I guess it's the second mechanic, where she spawns the 3 mirrors, where there's going to be cleaves going through the arena. The way we did it previously is we run towards the first save spot, then into the second one, then into the third save spot. But right now I pre-position myself pretty much in the middle of the arena, so I can slide cast into the first save spot, and then I identify whether I can immediately move into the final save spot, or if I need to wait one cleave before I can move into that one. So I only need 1 instant cast, and it basically gives me some more time to just stand still and cast stuff as well. So that's really comfortable right now as well. When it comes down to the rest of the mechanics for Shiva, the only one that is a bit spicy at the moment, well, when it comes down to like execution, is the knockback mirrors, because my GCDs sometimes align a little bit weird for that one, since we use our arm's length for that. So we stand at the edge where Shiva jumps towards, and then we do the whole knockback mirror dodge right there on the spot, meaning that you need to use your arm's length or your surecast at the perfect timing, or you're gonna get yeeted off the arena, so to speak. So that one I still fail every now and then, because of how my GCDs feel a little bit weird there. Might have to just start clipping until I get the timing down really well, because of course, as I said, we haven't had that much practice on it just yet. But that's something for the future that should get better. The main thing that concerns me about Shiva on that specific part is the follow-up mechanic, the gaze mirrors. Because you have your ley lines there, and if you want to use your ley lines on cooldown, you would use them towards the tail end of the knockback mirrors casting, basically doing their stuff. Or like towards the tail end of that mechanics is what I kind of mean. But on the other hand, if you want to do it optimally when it comes down to you keeping uptime on Shiva, you want to place your ley lines between where Shiva is in the middle of the arena. because that way, whenever the first gaze goes out from Shiva and from the blue mirrors, you can always face Shiva and never lose any uptime casting. On the other hand, you're going to be delaying your ley lines if you do that. And delaying your ley lines in the second phase is a bad thing, because the next usage of your ley lines is going to be right before Ice-Lit Dragonsong. And I think I already lose a little bit of uptime in my ley lines during Ice-Lit Dragonsong, because I need to move out so fast. And I also need to save a lot of stuff for that mechanic, because Ice-Lit Dragonsong really is not a fun mechanic on a caster. When it came down to Red Mage, depending on what I had available, I would just resort to using Reprise, but I would at least still have something to cast. When it comes down to Summoner, I think I have my Bahamut sometime during that window as well, so I could just substitute my stuff for Ruin 2s, which again is a damage loss, but Ruin 2 is still something that you can do. On Black Mage, I find myself just using Scathe too much, so you really need to save all your stuff, get 2 Zenny Glossy stacks, get your Sharp cast ready, and then also have your triple cast ready as well. So I need to still see to kind of figure out how I can get all of that to work together, because I find myself using my instant casts a whole lot more during that second phase of Shiva. But for the most part, knockback or like the gaze mirrors, something that I might need to figure out a little bit better. I kind of know what I should be doing. I'm not quite sure if I want to do it like that though, because it delays my ley lines a bit, but we'll see about that. Maybe I can change some stuff here or there, like moving to the middle of the arena faster or something like that. But we'll have to wait and see about that. And then when it comes down to Ice-Lit Dragonsong, that's something that I'll just need to figure out. Maybe I'll watch a POV on YouTube to kind of see how a better Black Mage player handles that mechanic, to see what they are doing, and then maybe adjust myself to what they are doing as well. But those are kind of like my opinions on the current Savage rate here with Black Mage. What I am struggling with a little bit, how I handle certain mechanics. For the most part, pretty comfortable job, and I think that if I spend a couple more weeks on it, it should be one of the more comfortable jobs to play, because of course, as I said, I was gonna compare it a little bit to the other casters as well. The way how I look at it is Black Mage is probably the easiest caster to play when it comes down to their rotation itself, because the rotation of Black Mage is very intuitive and is very simple. Red Mage is also really easy, so I guess they're kind of on par when it comes down to that. But when it comes down to playing it well in an actual fight with mechanics, that's where I think Black Mage is the hardest, because when you learn how to play Red Mage, you learn how to play Summoner, you are learning the job itself, and the job itself can have quite a lot of moving parts, especially when you look towards Summoner. They have their pets, they have their demi summons, they have their Aether Flow, they have the dots that you have to keep up, Ruin 4 optimization, all of that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of moving parts when it comes down to learning Summoner, and learning Summoner is going to take a lot longer than learning Black Mage, because Black Mage is really straightforward as a job. But once you have learned how to play Summoner, it is really easy to apply it to a fight. Like for example, we went back into Alexander Ultimate, and it was pretty brain dead. The only thing I had to think about was mechanics, but I already learned them from playing tanking there plenty of times. So there was very little for me to learn to play Summoner in that fight. The only thing I had to kind of think about was how I was going to do my dots on the 2 targets in the first 2 phases, but outside of that, I didn't really have to think about much, because I knew how to play Summoner, I knew how to do the fight, so it was really easy to combine the 2 of them. Now, going over into Black Mage after I've done Savage for 8 weeks or something like that, I still find myself struggling with mechanics and having to come up with new ways on how to handle them. As I said, for example, with Shiva, the triple mirrors with the cleaves and that kind of stuff, like positioning myself different in the beginning so I can slide cast into the first safe spot. Thinking about only needing to do 1 dodge instead of 2 to like minimize movement and that kind of stuff. So for me personally, that is really fun, because I enjoy going back into those fights, doing it on different jobs and learning different ways to handle the mechanics. On the other hand, I can see why it would be a downside for a lot of people, because they don't want to having to invest a lot of extra time when they are switching between jobs. Like for example, I still really want to clear all of the Savage on the tank, for example, on my Gunbreaker, I want to do that. But when I go in on Gunbreaker now, I pretty much know all the mechanics already, so just applying my job to the fight is going to be really easy, because the only thing I need to really think about are the tank busters, and that's it. If I were to play a different DPS, exactly the same thing. I don't have to think about all that much, I just need to think about my rotation. If I can do the rotation, it's easy to apply it to the fight. When it came down to playing Black Mage into the fight, it was a whole lot harder for me because all of a sudden you're not just thinking about applying your rotation to the fight itself, but you also need to think about all those other things like where do I need to save my instant costs, when is it an okay time to plop down my ley lines and just sit in there all the time. Do I hold my sharp cost for another time or something like that? Do I want to use my Xenoglossy here? What instant cost do I need for this specific mechanic or something like that? So it's a lot more complicated when it comes down to just doing the fight itself, because there are a lot more things that you need to think about when it comes down to playing Black Mage. So when it comes down to rotation, Black Mage is really easy to play. When it comes down to applying it to a fight, every fight is gonna have a much bigger learning curve than some of the other jobs. Even the extreme primals. If I go into an extreme primal, for example, I have played Summoner in an extreme primal, super easy, I know what to do. I can switch to Machinist, do exactly the same. Switch to Dancer, no issue. Switch to Gunbreaker, I just need to think about Tank Busters, but cooldowns are really easy in this expansion anyways, so don't need to think about that too much either. Do I immediately go Black Mage? Okay, all of a sudden I need to think, where do I want to use my triple cost? What would be the best place to use these things as well when it comes down to my cooldowns or my ley lines and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot more thought that goes into playing Black Mage in a new fight, or in an existing fight already, because you just have to think about so many different things. But that is something that does make the job very appealing to me, because it is a lot of fun to try and figure all of those things out again as well. And I do think that when you figure all of those things out on a Black Mage, it's going to be so much easier to apply those things on other jobs as well. So I've been rambling on for long enough. It's been about 20 minutes at this point. So those are kind of like my thoughts on Black Mage in the current Savage tier. Really enjoying it, enjoying the challenge for me personally that is attached to it as well. And yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. So I want to thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to thank my Patreons for supporting me, and I'll see you in the next one.